See, there was a point in the Vietnam War where American helicopters were getting shot down so fast that the guys flying them basically had a coin flip's chance of bringing their bird home in one piece. Damn near half of all Hueys that went to Vietnam got destroyed. And for years, the Army's answer to that was, we'll just strap more guns on the helicopter and hope for the best. What I'm going to tell you about today is what happened when somebody finally said that ain't good enough and actually built something that was designed to fight from the start. Okay guys, so before we get into the Cobra itself, we got to talk about what was going on with helicopters in Vietnam. Because if you don't understand the problem, the Cobra don't make sense. There's basically 3 steps that got us there. And once you see them, the whole thing clicks when the Cobra finally shows up. So let's get into it. The first American combat helicopters to arrive in Vietnam were 82 Piasecki 21 Shawnees, universally called the Flying Banana. And that nickname honestly tells you most of what you need to know. This was a tandem rotor, piston engine transport helicopter designed in the late 1940s for Arctic rescue. That's what it was built for, pulling people out of the snow. And nobody apparently had stopped to seriously think about what would happen when you took a machine designed for the Arctic and dropped it into the tropical heat and humidity of Southeast Asia. Well, the answer came real quick. Besides that, it barely worked. It also had zero protection from ground fire and was basically deemed obsolete already when it arrived. So you got this old, underpowered, unprotected banana helicopter hauling soldiers into a combat zone with nothing to shoot back with as your starting point. Now initially, just having helicopters at all was enough to cause some serious damage. The Vietcong at this point were armed with homemade shotguns and ancient French rifles, and when helicopter formations showed up overhead, they broke and ran. It was completely new to them, and the shock was real, but that wasn't going to last. On January 12, 1962, the first major helicopter combat operation of the war went down, Operation Chopper. 33 CH-21s airlifted over 1,000 ARVN paratroopers into a suspected Vietcong stronghold, and the VC were caught completely off guard. They had never seen anything like it. Troops just appearing from the sky dropped right into the middle of their positions, so the guerrillas got overwhelmed and beaten pretty quick. And I'm sure a lot of people on the American side looked at that and thought, all right, we've got something here. But here's where it starts going sideways, because the Vietcong adapted fast, way faster than anybody expected. They started figuring out every weakness these things had and put together a whole playbook of anti-helicopter tactics. They learned real quick that helicopters were most vulnerable when flying slow or low. And from there came a whole bag of tricks that would haunt our helicopter crews for the next decade. What started with just shooting at the helicopters while lying on their backs turned first into booby-trapped landing zones, and then pretty quickly into deliberate, calculated ambushes. They rigged the landing zones with hand grenades and mortar shells and other explosives connected to tripwires with a loosely planted pole stuck nearby. When the helicopter flared to land, the rotor wash pushed the pole across the tripwire and detonated the charge. These things were hidden in tall grass and damn near invisible until it was too late. But the bigger problem, the really dangerous one, was that the VC figured out the helicopter's worst moment, when it was slowest and most exposed during landing and takeoff, so they started positioning fighters with RPGs and machine guns near active landing zones and just waiting. And they figured out something else too. An American airmobile operation usually needed multiple trips to bring in a full force. So after the first wave landed and the helicopters left to go pick up the next group, VC fighters would move heavy weapons into position around that landing zone and be all set up when the follow-on flights came back in. They were catching the helicopters at the worst possible moment, slowing down, flaring to land, or just sitting motionless on the ground. That's about as defenseless as a helicopter is. Now, meanwhile, the Huey enters the picture, but not as a replacement for the CH-21, not yet. The first UH-1 helicopters arrived in Vietnam in early 1962, almost at the same time as the Shawnees, but in a completely different role. They were medevac birds. At the same time all this is happening, crews on the transport helicopters were improvising whatever defensive firepower they could manage. The CH-21 actually became the first helicopter in Vietnam to get door-mounted weapons, but there wasn't nothing standard about it. Some got 30 caliber machine guns at the door, others got 50 caliber Brownings, and there were several experimental setups, like one attempt to mount a B-29 Super Fortress remote-controlled 50 caliber turret under the nose. Which, I mean, points for creativity, but the CH-21's design made door guns pretty much useless regardless. So then came the first test unit with armed Hueys put together specifically to protect the transport helicopters that were getting shot up left and right at this point. Their weapons were mostly improvised, cobbled together right there in the field. Each AH-1A carried two .30 caliber machine guns and 16 2.75-inch rockets on homemade mounts. The unit's whole purpose was to fly armed escort for the transport companies. They'd flank the Shawnee formations on the way into landing zones, try to suppress enemy fire during insertion and stay overhead until the transports had gotten out. Then the Bravo models came along with factory-installed weapons, 4 M60 machine guns per aircraft, plus clusters of 8 2.75-inch rockets they rigged up in the field. So you can see the progression, right? Problem shows up, guys in the field improvise a fix, and the fix gets a little better each time. But nobody's actually solved the core problem yet. And then the whole thing blew up in the worst way possible. The Battle of Atbac, January 2nd, 1963. And for the first time, instead of scattering and melting into the jungle like they usually did, the Vietcong stood and fought. Roughly 350 well-armed fighters dug into bunkers along a tree line and canal, and they just hammered the helicopters. Heavy, accurate fire brought down 5 of them. 14 of the 15 helicopters involved took hits from ground fire. The helicopter wasn't something to be scared of anymore. It was becoming a target, and the Americans didn't have an answer for that yet. So the Flying Bananas got swapped out pretty quick for newer versions of Hueys. And as the Huey took over troop-carrying duties, the door gunner became a must-have. Every transport Huey, the Slicks as they came to be called, flew with 2 door gunners manning M60 machine guns, 1 on each side, giving the helicopter at least some ability to shoot back during the most dangerous moments of approach and landing. The door gun mounts evolved over time, from swiveling pintos to bungee cords and eventually rigid pedestals with mechanical stops to keep gunners from shooting their own aircraft. That was apparently a problem that needed solving. Standard setup on the UH-1 Slick was crew chief on the left, door gunner on the right. But door gunners on transport helicopters were a defensive measure. They still didn't have a good answer for how to bring real offensive firepower to protect those transports. And that problem kept pushing the Army further down the path toward a dedicated gunship. The UH-1B was getting used more and more as a gunship, loaded up with machine guns and rockets, but it had problems at its core that no amount of bolted-on weapons was ever going to fix. And here's the thing, hitting a Huey wasn't hard. You got to picture this. A helicopter flying at 100 feet off the ground at 95 miles per hour ain't that difficult to target. It's close, moving in a predictable path and slowing down to damn near 0 as it comes into the landing zone. The Huey's skin was thin aluminum designed to be light, not to stop bullets. And an AK-47 round punched through it without much trouble. The hydraulic lines, control cables, fuel lines, oil system, all of that ran through areas that were barely protected. A single round that nicked a hydraulic line meant the pilot could lose flight control. A round through a fuel line could start a fire or starve the engine. Over the entire war, 3,305 Hueys were destroyed out of roughly 7,000 that served in Vietnam. That's damn near half, and now you see why. And the VC and NVA learned quick that you didn't need some fancy anti-aircraft weapon to kill a helicopter. They picked up an old Soviet trick of just volley firing small arms at low-flying aircraft, an entire squad or platoon opening up at the same time. If enough guys are shooting, somebody's gonna hit something. And that's before you even get to the DSHK, the 12.7 mm Soviet-designed heavy machine gun that's roughly equivalent to the American 50 caliber Browning. And it started showing up in VC hands in serious numbers. A single burst from this thing was more than enough to make a Huey not see its base again. And God forbid they come upon the 37 millimeter anti-aircraft cannons, not to mention what that would do to a helicopter. So by this point, the situation is clear. The helicopters are essential, absolutely essential to how America is fighting this war. But they're fat, they're slow, and men are dying because of it. The Huey gunship proved you could use a helicopter to kill the enemy from the air. But strapping guns onto a utility helicopter and calling it a gunship was a compromise, and everybody knew it. The Army needed something built from the ground up to do this job. Now in the field, crews had their own names for these armed Hueys, and we have to clear out one name first. Rocket-armed ones were hogs or frogs, and the all-gun setups got nicknamed Cobras, or just guns, which is kind of funny because that's actually the first time the word Cobra showed up in Army helicopter service, years before the actual AH-1 existed. And between 1968 and 1970 alone, armed Hueys flew more than 1.5 million sorties. So the concept was proven in combat, no question. What the Army needed was an aircraft that was actually designed to do the job from the start, not a workhorse with guns bolted on that gets shot to hell. And when you loaded the thing up with weapons, ammunition, rockets, and fuel for a gunship mission, it was heavy. And all that weight lowered its already not so incredible performance. The Huey gunship couldn't carry its full weapons load and keep up with the transport Hueys it was supposed to be protecting. Now, the Army knew this. They weren't stupid. They knew the whole arrangement was a compromise, and they had actually been working on a proper answer since 1964. They kicked off a competition to design a purpose-built attack helicopter from scratch. Lockheed won the contract with the AH-1G Cheyenne, and this was supposed to be it, the future of Army attack aviation. But the Cheyenne turned into a nightmare, just one technical disaster after another. And after a full decade of development and 10 prototypes built, the Army just canceled the whole program. All that time, all that money gone, and the guys actually fighting in Vietnam still don't have a real attack helicopter. But while the Army was dumping money into the Cheyenne and watching it go nowhere, a small group of engineers at Bell Helicopter were quietly doing their own thing. And they built this thing called the Model 207 Sioux Scout, which is basically a modified Bell 47 with a narrow two-seat tandem cockpit grafted onto the front. And the whole point was to see what a slim, purpose-built gunship might look like. The idea had some legs, but the Bell 47 was just too small and underpowered for real combat. Right idea, wrong platform. So what did? They looked at what they already had, and they designed the new gunship around the Huey. They took the UH-1's proven turboshaft engine, its transmission, its rotor system, as many existing components as they could use. When you counted it all up, roughly 80% of this new aircraft was built from stuff that already existed in the Huey supply chain. That's smart right there, because it meant the spare parts, the maintenance know-how, the logistics pipeline, all of that was already in place. But that other 20% was completely new, and I ain't exaggerating when I say it was unlike anything that existed. The fuselage was only 36 inches across, less than half the width of a Huey. Now, y'all got to think about what that means if you're on the other end of it. When you're on the ground looking up and this thing is coming at you head on, which is exactly how it attacked. You're looking at a target so narrow it was damn near invisible. Instead of this big wide Huey coming at you that you can put rounds into all day, there's this thin angular shape screaming toward your position. The crew sat in tandem, one behind the other. Gunner/co-pilot rode in the forward lower seat controlling the chin turret. Pilot/aircraft commander sat elevated right behind, up high enough to see clean over the gunner's head, and he controlled everything mounted on the wings. Both were qualified pilots, so they could swap control mid-mission if somebody got hit or just needed a break. Big fighter-style canopy panels wrapped around both positions, so you had good visibility in every direction. Stub wings on each side gave you 4 hard points to hang weapons on, and under the nose sat an Emerson electric M28 chin turret. The whole machine was sleek and angular and just aggressive looking, like nothing anybody had ever put in the air before. The Army designated the AH-1G. Bell slapped Cobra onto the Huey name, so officially it was the AH-1G Huey Cobra. But in the field, the crews dropped everything except the Cobra, or more commonly, the Snake. And production moved fast, which was the whole point of building it from Huey parts in the first place. All right, now I want to slow down here, because this next part, how they kept the crews alive, is one of the most important parts of this whole story, and it usually gets skipped over. Bell's engineers had spent years watching Hueys come back shot full of holes, or not come back at all. They knew exactly what killed a helicopter in combat, and every single one of those lessons got designed into the AH-1G from the start. The fuselage was built from honeycomb aluminum panels, which were tougher than just thin aluminum skin, and the fuel tank was self-sealing. See, in an early helicopter's fuel tank, a single bullet hole meant fuel pouring out under pressure. Fuel spraying onto hot engine components or electrical systems meant fire. And fire in a helicopter wasn't really great for the crew's health and well-being. The Cobra's self-sealing tank used multiple layers of rubber and other materials that swelled on contact with fuel. So if, or better to say when, a round went through, the material around the hole expanded and basically plugged itself, stopping or at least slowing the leak way down. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it bought the crew more time to get the hell out before catching fire or running out of fuel. The engine, fuel system, and hydraulic lines all got armor protection too. They bolted on panels of carbon fiber composite over the spots where Huey losses had shown them. Bullets did the worst damage, lightweight stuff, but tough enough to stop or deflect small arms fragments. It also ran a dual hydraulic flight control system, so if one system took a hit, the backup kept the pilot flying. The crew compartment, though, that got the most attention by far. Both the pilots and gunner seats were armored with tempered steel that could stop 7.62 rounds. Carbon fiber side panels ran along both sides of the cockpit, creating basically an armored tub around each crew member. An armored nose plate sat in front of the gunner station, protecting him from fire coming straight at the aircraft. And think about that, this thing attacks by diving nose first into enemy positions. So the front is exactly where most of the rounds are going to be coming from. Now, the original model actually had full armored glass on the canopy, but it turned out to be too heavy and got yanked before production. They went with lighter plexiglass instead. It wouldn't stop a direct hit, but you got to make trade-offs somewhere. And on top of all that, both crew members wore the so-called chicken plate, the body armor made specifically for helicopter combat in Vietnam that could stop a .30 caliber armor-piercing round. All right, so now let's talk about what the Cobra actually carried for weapons, because this is where it gets ridiculous. That M28 turret under the nose, you could set this thing up different ways depending on the mission. You could mount two General Electric M134 7.62 millimeters miniguns, each one capable of spitting out 2,000 to 4,000 rounds per minute in 3-second bursts. Or you could pair one minigun with a Philco Ford M129 40 millimeters automatic grenade launcher, or run two grenade launchers if that's how your day was going. Each minigun fed from a 4,000 round magazine, and each grenade launcher carried 340 millimeters high explosive rounds. Then you had the stub wings, almost 11 feet across with 4 hard points that could carry up to 76 2.75-inch rockets. And some variants mounted General Electric XM 195 20 millimeters Gatling cannon, which was a short-barreled version of the M61 Vulcan. That's a lot of hate coming out of one small package. The AH-1G Cobra was the first purpose-built production attack helicopter in the world. It carried twice as much ammunition as a Huey gunship and got to the fight in half the time, and then could loiter over the area 3 times as long. Single Cobra could pack more firepower than an entire platoon of Huey gunships combined and deliver it faster, more accurately, and from a platform that was a hell of a lot harder to kill. The Cobra cruised at 140 to 150 miles per hour, fast enough to not just keep up with the transport Hueys, but outpace them, which for a helicopter in the 1960s, that's cooking. By the end of 1967, Cobras were already showing up at frontline units across South Vietnam, and then within months, they had flat out replaced Huey gunships in every major assault helicopter company. And here's how you know the thing was working. By 1972, the NVA often just wouldn't shoot at Cobras at all. They'd learned the hard way what happened when you did. The payback was massive and instant, and they decided it just wasn't worth it. Now, as the Cobra spread across Vietnam, it became one half of what a lot of veterans still call the most lethal and the most dangerous tactical pairing of the entire war. The hunter-killer team, known as the Pink Team. You paired 2 completely different aircraft designed to find and destroy an enemy that hid under triple canopy jungle where you couldn't see a damn thing from altitude. The Hunter was the Hueys OH-6 Hueys, much better known as the Loach. Observation helicopter, incredibly nimble, almost impossibly small. The Loach's job was to fly low, right down in the trees, scanning the ground for any sign of the enemy. And here's the catch, the whole way you found the enemy was by getting shot at. I'm gonna say that again. You flew around until somebody opened up on you, and that's how you knew where they were hiding. The Loach was bait. You can probably guess what the life expectancy looked like for these crews. Of the 1,422 OH-6A Loaches produced for the Army, 964 were destroyed in Vietnam. That's a loss rate of roughly 68% if you can't do the math. Just kidding. Then the killer was the Cobra. While the Loach crept along down in the trees, the snake circled up at about 1,500 feet ready to go. The second the Loach took hits or the crew popped smoke to mark an enemy position, the Cobra dived in and opened up on any unfortunate thing that made the mistake of being spotted or, God forbid, shooting at the recon helicopter. 4 troop-carrying Hueys, called a Blue Team, usually sat at a nearby staging point too, ready to insert infantry if the Pink Team found something worth hitting with boots, or to pull out a downed Loach crew if it came to that, because it came to that a lot. So the Cobra had been in country for about 6 months, and it was already proven everything it was designed to do. And this is where we go from talking about the aircraft to talking about one specific guy who had a problem with flying the Cobra because he couldn't fit his gigantic balls inside the cockpit on the night of June 18th. First Lieutenant Larry Lee Taylor had been in Vietnam for 10 months by that point. He'd already flown hundreds of combat missions, and over the course of his full tour, he'd end up logging more than 2,000, taking enemy fire 340 times and getting shot down 5 times. He'd already picked up a Distinguished Flying Cross for laying down cover fire during a medevac extraction under heavy contact. He knew what it looked like when men on the ground were about to die, and he knew what his Cobra could do about it. But he couldn't even imagine just how far he was going to have to push his snake in just a few hours. That evening, a 4-man long-range reconnaissance patrol team was way out deep behind enemy lines. Now, if you're not familiar with these, LRRP teams, short for long-range reconnaissance patrol, or just LRPs, these were small, lightly armed groups whose whole job was to move quietly through enemy territory, avoid contact, and gather intelligence. The only way they stayed alive was by not getting found. 4 guys with light weapons were way behind the lines, and if things go sideways, there ain't a whole lot between them and a real bad night. Well, things went sideways. It was pitch black out. The team had been moving along a narrow path through rice paddy when one of the men scanning through a night vision scope saw what no recon team ever wanted to see: enemy soldiers around them. And not a few of them. The team was completely surrounded by what turned out to be over 100 Vietcong fighters. The enemy hadn't spotted the 4 Americans yet, but it was just a matter of time. There was no way out on foot as every direction was blocked. So one of them grabbed the radio and whispered the call for help. That distress call reached Taylor. Him and his co-pilot / gunner, Chief Warrant Officer 2J Ratliff, scrambled to their Cobra while his wingman, Captain Roger Trickler, scrambled to his. Now they only knew the general direction of the team. They couldn't use their helicopter lights, so Taylor and Ratliff worked the radio and direction finding equipment, trying to narrow down where these guys might be. Once they figured they were roughly overhead, Taylor radioed the team and told them to mark their position with flares because they didn't want to risk blasting their own guys with rockets. Now, the thing is, popping flares would show Taylor where the friendlies were, but it would also light them up for every Vietcong fighter in the area. They knew that all too well, but there just wasn't any other way to pinpoint their position without feeding them rockets and miniguns along with the enemy. The flares lit up the rice paddies and tree lines around the patrol, and every direction just erupted with gunfire. Taylor called for artillery illumination rounds to light up the whole area from above so he could pick out where the enemy was. Then both Cobras dove in. Flying at dangerously low altitude, Taylor and Trickler started making run after run, blasting the tree lines around the patrol. These were danger close runs, literally within meters of the Americans on the ground, while the 4 men of the recon team fought back with everything they had. For about 45 minutes, the 2 Cobras fired 152 rockets and about 16,000 rounds of minigun ammo. But the fuel gauges were dropping too. And the Vietcong, despite taking heavy casualties, kept pressing and tightening that ring. On the ground, the team was also running out of ammo. Now, at some point during all this, Taylor got word that a Huey was on its way to pull the team out. But then the second message came. The Huey mission was canceled. Somebody up the chain had decided the situation on the ground was too hot for an extraction attempt. The 4 men of the recon team were basically being written off because attempting to save them would only get helicopters shot down and more people killed. So as far as command was concerned, it was easier to just leave them on their own. The order came over the radio to Taylor to return to base to refuel and rearm. Taylor later said that cause of quote-unquote radio interference, he wasn't hearing the order clearly, which, I mean, that was bullshit, and everybody knew it was bullshit. But nobody could tell him a damn thing at that point because his radio was off. He switched the radio back to the recon team's frequency because he wasn't leaving those men to die. But now he had a problem, besides the one where the helicopter was damn near out of ammo and running low on fuel and people are shooting at him. The Cobra, as we said, is a 2-seat attack helicopter. There ain't no cargo bay, troop compartment, or a door you can slide open. There's just nowhere to put anybody, even if he was crazy enough to do something like, I don't know, turning on his lights and landing in the middle of a rice paddy under heavy enemy fire. Well, spoiler alert, that was about exactly what was about to happen, but there still ain't no space on the Cobra for more than 2 people. Now with no ammunition left, Taylor kept circling low under heavy enemy fire. He switched on his searchlight and landing lights and started making fake gun runs on the enemy positions, and the VC dove for cover every time because they had no way of knowing the Cobra's magazines were empty. That bought a little more time for the team on the ground, but not much. Then Taylor got on the radio with the team. "You guys still have your claymores?" The answer came back, "Roger." Taylor then told him exactly what to do. When they saw him start his next run, blow all the claymores on one side and sprint the opposite direction, about 100 meters to a rice paddy clearing he'd spotted where he figured he could set it down. He directed Trickler's Cobra to fire whatever minigun rounds it still had on the team's east flank, then head back to base. When everything was ready, he gave the signal and the claymores went off. The 4 soldiers fired their very last rounds and threw their last grenades behind them as they were running for dear life toward that small clearing where Taylor put the Cobra down, all while under fire. As Taylor said later, "I didn't have to tell them to get on. 4 guys grabbed onto the skids and rocket pods of an attack helicopter. And in just 8 seconds after touching down, Taylor heard 2 thumps on the cabin, which is military code for basically get us the hell out of here. He pulled pitch and got him off the ground. Now he's got 4 men clinging to the outside of his helicopter. And he's got to dodge the fire coming up at him, but he can't maneuver too hard or he'll shake those guys off. And if all this ain't enough, they had less than 20 minutes of fuel left for what should have been a 25-minute flight back to base. The men on the outside were glad to be alive somehow, but were getting battered by rotor wash and wind and could lose their grip any second. Taylor flew low and slow for about 5 miles to a nearby American air base, set the Cobra down, and the 4 soldiers climbed off, stood up, and saluted. Taylor saluted back, then headed off to refuel, while the team probably went to change their underwear, but more than happy to be alive to tell about it. All 4 members of the team survived. Taylor got the Silver Star for this action, but that citation was going to get revisited down the road. Over his full tour in Nam, the man racked up 61 combat decorations. Now, there's a part of this story that comes a whole lot later. Dave Hill, one of the guys from that team, first met Taylor face-to-face at a 1999 unit reunion in Branson, Missouri, 31 years after that night in the rice paddy, and it was the first time they'd ever actually laid eyes on each other. They became lifelong friends after that. On September the 5th, 2023, President Joe Biden presented the Medal of Honor to the 81-year-old Taylor, who was by then in the last stages of cancer. Dave Hill, the sole surviving member of the recon team, stood nearby during the ceremony. Larry Lee Taylor died on January 28, 2024. As for the Cobra, out of 824 of them that served in Vietnam, about 200 got shot down over 6 years. 235 Cobra pilots and 12 crewmen were killed in action. But the concept of the first attack helicopter in the world set the stage for even crazier things to come, like the Apache and many others. The Cobra, though, you'd have to admit, was truly something special.